Beethoven is considered by many to be the greatest musical talent of all time. Little argument there. But when it comes to his heritage, there seems to be a disagreement between scholars, historians, and independent researchers whether the musical prodigy was actually white. There have been many recorded accounts and reports questioning this narrative and suggesting that Beethoven was actually black. But is there any truth to this? Perform a quick Google search on the matter, and you will get a ton of ambiguous answers like these. Was Beethoven black? Probably not. There is no reason to believe that Beethoven was black. Was Beethoven black? The evidence is scant and inconclusive. Ultimately, there is no definitive evidence that Beethoven had African ancestry. And my favorite, unfortunately for these theorists, nobody has dug up positive proof that a person of color has contributed to Beethoven's genealogy. But why these answers and not a definitive no? Do these people know something that we don't? Well, that's what we're trying to find out today. Now that we have the history lesson out of the way, we can begin to explore the evidence. Many of these reports blame the Concordian, a student run newspaper of Concordia College located in, interestingly enough, Moorhead, Minnesota, for reigniting a debate that was dead since the 60s and started a Twitter frenzy about Black Beethoven in 2015. The student journalist writes that evidence suggests whitewashing of the composer's legacy, along with a picture of Beethoven's death mask. In the article, you will also find a list of descriptions that sound very much like they are describing a person of color. But are these descriptions actually referencing Beethoven? And if they are, who made them? And also stating that there is one pencil sketch that has stood the test of time and was supposedly Beethoven's favorite depiction of himself. This is a photo he had printed and reprinted, distributing it to all his friends and family as a memento. In this photo, his face is broad, his hair is unruly, and his skin is very dark. This is where things begin to add up, she says. But where is this photo? How come we have never seen it? And lastly, she has a list of all her sources. While continuing my research, I came across this article from 2004 from a site called Civilization Fanatics or Civs Fanatic, where a user by the name tag of Warlord posted the same description of Beethoven as given by the Concordian article, but this time with the name and title of the people that said it, along with his source of information. Warlord writes that, contrary to popular belief, Beethoven was actually black. Here are some academical sources and eyewitness accounts that verify this fact. Note that Beethoven's mother is said to be a Moor. His source, from J. Rogers' work, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro with Complete Proof, which was written in 1957. Now let's ask the same of Beethoven and see what kind of response we get.
There is no evidence to suggest that Ludwig van Beethoven was black. Beethoven was a German composer who lived from 1770 to 1827 and is widely considered one of the greatest composers of all time. While there is some speculation about Beethoven's appearance, based on portraits and descriptions from his contemporaries, there is no credible evidence to suggest that he was of African descent or had black ancestry. It's important to rely on historical facts and evidence when discussing the identity and heritage of historical figures.
Yes, it is very important to rely on historical facts and evidence, and that's what we're intending to do today. Friedrich Hertz, German anthropologist in Race and Civilization, refers twice to Beethoven's Negroid traits and his dark skin and flat, thick nose.
It is true that Friedrich Hertz, a German anthropologist of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, wrote in his book Race and Civilization that Beethoven had Negroid traits and dark skin, as well as a flat, thick nose. However, Hertz's claims have been widely discredited by modern scholars and are not supported by any historical evidence. Hertz's ideas about race were based on outdated and discredited theories of racial classification, which have been thoroughly debunked by contemporary scientific research. Additionally, Hertz did not have access to any reliable physical evidence about Beethoven's appearance, and his claims were largely speculative and based on hearsay. In short, there is no credible evidence to suggest that Beethoven had Negroid traits or was of African descent. Beethoven was born into a white family of Flemish origin in Germany, and while he may have had a dark complexion and curly hair, these traits can be explained by a variety of factors that are not related to race or ethnicity.
Okay, looks like we're going to make some progress after all. Frau Fischer, an intimate acquaintance of Beethoven, describes him thus: short, stocky, broad shoulders, short neck, round nose, blackish brown complexion.
While it is true that Frau Fischer, an acquaintance of Beethoven, described him as having a blackish-brown complexion in a letter she wrote in 1810, it is important to understand the historical context in which this description was made. In the 18th and 19th centuries, people had different standards for what constituted blackness or whiteness, and physical descriptions often included subjective and culturally specific terms that are no longer used today. Furthermore, it is important to note that Frau Fischer's description of Beethoven's complexion was based on her own subjective perceptions, and may not accurately reflect his actual skin color. Regardless of his appearance, it is important to recognize Beethoven's musical contributions and his impact on Western classical music. Focusing on his physical appearance or speculating about his racial identity detracts from his legacy and the important role he played in shaping the course of music history.
In the biographical series The Life of Ludwig van Beethoven by American journalist Alexander Wheelock Thayer, Beethoven is described as having the following features as he arrived in Vienna as a youth. Thayer says that, like the multitude of studious youth and young men who came thither annually to find schools and teachers, this small, thin, dark complexion, pockmarked, dark eye, bewigged young musician of 22 years old had quietly journeyed to the capital to pursue the study of his art with this small, thin, dark complexion, pockmarked, black eye, and bewigged veteran composer. In the well-known anecdote related by Carpani of Haydn's introduction to him, Anton Esterhazy, the prince, is made to call the composer a Moor. Beethoven had even more of a Moor in his looks than his master. His front teeth, owing to the singular flatness of the roof of his mouth, protruded and, of course, thrust out his lips. The nose, too, was rather broad and decisively flattened, while the forehead was remarkably full and round. In the words of the late court secretary Mayer, who twice painted his portrait, a bullet.
This passage describes Beethoven's physical appearance as a young man when he arrived in Vienna to study music. He is described as small, thin, and dark-complexioned, with a pockmarked face, dark eyes, and a wig. The passage notes that Beethoven had even more of the Moor in his looks than his master Haydn. His front teeth protruded due to the flatness of the roof of his mouth, and his nose was broad and flattened. The passage also mentions that his forehead was remarkably full and round, which was described as a bullet by the painter Mahler, who painted Beethoven's portrait twice.
Thayer adds that Beethoven was an ugly little man, and no one would be more astonished than the great composer should he return and see how he has been idealized by sculptors and painters. This is why it was important for you to learn the term artistic liberty.
Yes, Thayer did write in his biography of Beethoven that the composer was an ugly little man, and that he would be astonished to see how he had been idealized by artists. However, it is important to note that Thayer's assessment of Beethoven's appearance is subjective and reflects the cultural values and aesthetic standards of his time. Moreover, Thayer's statement about Beethoven's appearance should be understood in the context of his broader biography, which is widely regarded as a pioneering and authoritative work on the composer's life and music. It is therefore important to approach Thayer's biography and other historical sources with a critical and nuanced perspective, and to recognize that they may reflect biases and assumptions that are not necessarily accurate or appropriate by contemporary standards.
Paul Becker, another very noted authority on Beethoven, says that the most faithful picture of Beethoven's head shows him with a wide, thick-lipped mouth, short, thick nose, and proudly arched forehead.
It is true that there are varying descriptions of Beethoven's physical appearance from different historical sources, some of which mention features that have been associated with people of African descent. However, it is important to recognize that physical features alone are not indicative of one's race or ethnicity, and that attempts to categorize individuals based on their appearance can be harmful and perpetuate harmful stereotypes. Regardless of his physical appearance, Beethoven's musical contributions and artistic legacy continue to inspire and resonate with people around the world. As Thayer notes, Beethoven's genius and impact on the world of music are far more significant than any physical attributes he may have possessed, and it is this legacy that has earned him his place as one of the greatest composers of all time. It is important to approach historical figures and their legacies with a nuanced and critical perspective, recognizing the complexities of their lives and the social and cultural contexts in which they lived. While it is interesting to explore different accounts of Beethoven's appearance, it is ultimately his musical achievements that have secured his place in history and continue to captivate audiences to this day.
In speaking of the immortal Haydn, who was Beethoven's teacher, Andre de Hevesi says, Everybody knows the incident at Martin or Eisenstadt, the residence of Prince Esterhazy. In the middle of the first allegro, the prince stopped the musicians and asked who was the author of this work. Haydn, said Freiberg, but he belongs to my house. How is that I have not seen him yet? He is here. And Freiberg pushed the composer, trembling with emotion, before the great Hungarian lord. Now occurred a repetition, but an intended one, of the scene with the Countess of Thun, and Haydn recounted the story of his presentation with less cheerfulness than that of the first, notwithstanding his devotion to the Esterhazy family, whose servant he was for 30 years. Where the noble lady had showed discreet surprise, the Magyar was seized with a violent fit of laughter before this little man with dark colored face. Is this music truly by this Moor? Well, well, Blackamoor, from this day thou dost belong to me, but I do not like to see thy thus. Thou art Dorth, thy face is piteous. Dress thyself like a Kapellmeister, get a new suit, a buckle wig, red band, and red heels, and take care that the heels are high, because thy stature should correspond with thy merit. I then
The passage you mentioned is from Haydn. Lettre Eckreit's pendant son, Sejor Lunder. English translation. The Haydn. Letters written during his stay in London by Giovanni Carpani, published in Milan in 1812. Carpani's work consists of a collection of letters and anecdotes about Joseph Haydn, the renowned composer. In this passage, we see a scene where the prince interrupts the musicians during the performance and asks about the composer of the work. Freiberg responds that it is Haydn, who apparently belongs to his house. The prince expresses surprise that he has not met Haydn yet. Freiberg then pushes Haydn forward, and a repetition of a previous scene with the Countess of Thun occurs. Haydn, visibly moved, recounts the story of the presentation with less cheerfulness than the first time. Despite his loyalty and dedication to the Esterhazy family, for whom he has served as a servant for 30 years, he seems somewhat less enthusiastic. However, instead of discreet surprise, like the noble lady, the Magyar lord bursts into a fit of laughter upon seeing Haydn, a small man with a dark complexion. The lord questions whether the music is truly composed by this Moor, a term likely used to describe Haydn's appearance. He then declares that Haydn now belongs to him and instructs him to dress like a Kapellmeister, a musical director, in a new suit, a wig with buckles, a red band, and red high-heeled shoes. The prince emphasizes that the heel should be high to correspond with Haydn's merit, as if to say that Haydn's talent should compensate for his physical stature. This passage captures a moment of interaction between Haydn, a renowned composer, and a Magyar lord who finds amusement in Haydn's appearance. The lord's comments about Haydn's dress and stature reflect the hierarchical and status-conscious society of the time.
Now let's ask ChatGPT again whether the statements made describing Beethoven as a person of color have actually been made.
Yes, all of these statements have been said or written about Beethoven at some point in history. However, it is important to note that these descriptions often reflect the biases and prejudices of the individuals who made them, rather than providing an accurate depiction of Beethoven's appearance. It is also worth noting that descriptions of Beethoven's physical appearance varied widely over time and across different sources.
Okay, now that ChatGPT has acknowledged all of our evidence, let's go and ask again whether it thinks that Beethoven had any African ancestry. And let's see if we get a different response than what we got in the beginning. Based on the evidence provided, is it possible for Beethoven to have African ancestry?
Based on the descriptions of Beethoven's physical appearance provided in historical sources, some of which mention features that have been associated with people of African descent, it is possible that Beethoven may have had some African ancestry. However, without DNA evidence or other concrete proof, it is impossible to say for certain whether or not Beethoven had African ancestry.
Okay, now, this is monumental. Artificial intelligence has analyzed all of our evidence and determined that it is in the realm of possibility for Beethoven to have African ancestry, after initially telling us that there was no evidence to back this theory up. Now, the reason why I say this is monumental is because ChatGPT has somewhat gone against its biased programming and determined that the documentation we presented has merit, as they come from first-hand accounts of individuals that lived during Beethoven's time, making them credible sources and make it at least possible to consider that Beethoven may have been black, even though it gave us a political answer at the end. But at least now we have a leg to stand on, and it's a step in the right direction. And as ChatGPT stated, Without DNA evidence, all of those accounts about Beethoven's appearance, even though they come from good, reliable sources, are not good enough to prove Beethoven's African heritage. Now, the question remains, has Beethoven's DNA ever been examined? And the answer is yes, in 2005. The article from the Concordian about a pencil sketch of Beethoven that stood the test of time, in which he had printed and reprinted and distributed to friends and family as a memento. Let's ask ChatGPT if such a sketch actually ever existed.
It is true that there is a pencil sketch of Beethoven that is widely recognized as an accurate representation of his appearance. The sketch was made by the artist Ferdinand Schimmon in 1819 when Beethoven was 49 years old. Beethoven himself liked the sketch and had it reproduced in lithographic form, which he then distributed to friends and admirers as a memento. In the sketch, Beethoven is depicted with a broad face, unruly hair, and a prominent forehead. However, it is not accurate to say that his skin is very dark in the sketch. While he does appear to have a slightly darker complexion than what was typical for the time, it is not a significant departure from other depictions of him. It is worth noting that Beethoven was known to be quite particular about his appearance, and was known to take great care in choosing his clothing and grooming himself. However, he was also known to be quite self-conscious about his physical appearance, particularly as he began to lose his hearing and become more isolated from society.
Before we continue, I know that some people will agree and others will disagree with my findings. However, I'd like you to know that debating the truth is essential for promoting critical thinking, intellectual growth, and informed decision making. However, it is equally important to engage in these debates with respect and civility. Disrespectful and angry behavior can be counterproductive, shutting down communication and preventing meaningful exchange of ideas. Therefore, it is essential to approach debates with an open mind, willingness to listen, and a commitment to treating others with respect, even if we disagree with their viewpoints. By doing so, we can promote a culture of intellectual curiosity, respect, and constructive dialogue, enabling us to better understand the world and each other. See, there's this version of this book, A Memoir of Beethoven, written in 1870 by Elliot Gramey, that you can buy today. But it is not the original version. On the front cover of this book, you'll find a version of Beethoven we're all accustomed to seeing. Thanks to the availability of digital books, we're able to find the original copy in the Google Play Store. So if you just scroll down and click here, from 1870, you find this image of what appears to be a mulatto Beethoven, and everything starting to make sense. But this is still not the original image. If you go down, you find this image here, which is a little faded. Now be honest with yourself. If you were in a game show and the grand prize was $1 million, and all you had to do was guess whether this person was of African descent or a Caucasian, where would you put your money on? Now, even though this image is faded, if you look closely, you will see all those features of Beethoven that were described by his contemporaries, such as the ruly hair, the forehead, the thick nose, and the thick lips. And if you look really close, you can kind of make out his eyes looking at you. Now, keep in mind that Beethoven is said to be 49 years old when he sat down for this portrait. And while this reimagined version does maintain most of his likeness, it was envisioned as a younger version of Beethoven. Now, this is the third interpretation of the original image. Now, this is the fourth interpretation. It has no traces of the original image except for the clothes. Now, this is the fifth interpretation of the image, and this is the final evolution of the image. It appears that Beethoven has been given the Dr. 90210 makeover without needing his approval. Now, this would have been the natural progression of the follow-up image and not what we have been sold. Remember that Beethoven was about 49 years old when the portrait was painted. Well, I use an artificial intelligence image restorer, and this is what it was able to repair. Even though it could not fix the entire image, I was pleased with the results. And there you have it for the first time. Beethoven, just as beautiful as his mother made him, and not what these so-called artists have made him out to be. And if you're still one of those people that after all the evidence we have presented on this video,
it's still not convinced and will point to Beethoven's death mask as evidence to hold on to your beliefs, well, we have bad news for you, as those also have been altered in the name of art. A death mask was a common way used to preserve a person's likeness by taking a cast or impression from the corpse. Some of you have probably seen this mask of Beethoven. Scholars can't even agree on whether this is his death mask or life mask, as is being passed as both. But it doesn't matter, because they are just artistic representation of the composer and the real death mask. These are also artistic representation of the death mask, and are closer to the original than that of the first. Now this here is the original death mask. Can you see a resemblance between the original death mask and that of the original portraits of Beethoven? I think it's undeniable that all of these arts were based on the same person, as they hold a similar likeness to each other. Some of the features from the death mask appear very similar to those of the life portraits, such as the forehead, the cheekbones, the nose, and the lips. Or do you think the death mask better resembles this version of Beethoven? And these are portraits of Beethoven said to have been taken at different points in the composer's life. As you can clearly see, not a single one of these images resembles one another, proving that they are not based on any single person, but rather on the imagination of the artist. It's as if Beethoven went through dramatic transformation at each of these stages in his life, including the different colors of his hair. They even tried to give him a similar likeness to the piano inventor Bartolomeo Cristofori di Francesco, to your left. For every known portrayal of Beethoven, there is another version that has been whitewashed that is considered artistic liberty. History plays a crucial role in shaping our understanding of the world and ourselves. It forms the foundation of personal and family legacies, reflecting the achievements, struggles, and values of the individuals and their kin. However, when history is whitewashed, deliberately altered or sanitized to present a distorted version of events, the consequences can be far-reaching. When a person's history is whitewashed, their accomplishment may be underrepresented or entirely erased. This undermines their rightful recognition and appreciation for their achievements. Without an accurate portrayal of their contributions, their legacy becomes overshadowed, and they're denied the acknowledgement they deserve. As a result, future generations may fail to understand and appreciate the true significance of their accomplishments. Whitewashing history not only affects the individual's legacy, but also has an implication for their family's identity and heritage. Family legacies are interwoven with the experiences, values, and narrative of their ancestors. When a person's history is whitewashed, their family's identity is distorted, and the true richness of their heritage is lost. This can lead to a disconnection from one's roots, a weakened sense of identity, and a diminished understanding of the struggles and triumphs that have shaped their family's journey and cultural journeys as well. Whitewashing history often perpetuates systematic injustice and inequality. By silencing or rewriting the experiences of marginalized individuals or communities, their struggles and achievements are negated, contributing to the erasure of their contributions to society. This perpetuates systematic biases and denies the opportunity for reconciliation, understanding, and progress. In essence, whitewashing history hinders society's ability to address historical injustices and work towards a more inclusive and equitable future. In conclusion, the consequences of whitewashing histories are far-reaching, affecting both individual and family legacies. Authenticity is lost, recognition and appreciation are diminished, family identities are distorted, lessons and values become skewed, and systematic injustices persist. It is imperative that we strive for a truthful and inclusive understanding of history, embracing the complexity and diversity of human experiences. By doing so, we honor the full range of individual legacies and foster a more enlightened and just society for generations to come.